very practical illustrations that both echo what you, Vice President, just spoke to. It also reminds me of something that Ahuna, my colleague and regional director, discussed with me as we were walking to this session, that we often talk about youth in development terms, but also on the African continent as something that is a kind of promise for the future. Youth is almost a state of deferment. You're a young person, you're not an adult, therefore you can't really do anything, and you just gave a fascinating example. I mean, if you cannot register land, where on earth do you start becoming an entrepreneur? And, this is the clash of traditional informal sector activity and the harsh truth of the modern world, that you want to own land, you walk in there, and as you say, maybe with the double challenge of being a woman and a young person. I think these are the sort of things that across the continent right now are being uncovered also as, debates are taking place. And maybe if I may turn for a moment to, Ifeyinwa Ugochukwu, who is the CEO of the Tony Elumelu Foundation. Since Pato just mentioned that she crossed your path, so to speak, can you share with us a little bit, given how the foundation is approaching the promotion of entrepreneurship of young people, can you maybe share a little bit the 3 or 4 more examples of what is it that is holding it back, and how are you as a foundation able to make a difference? Because you can do it one by one, but you also want to do it country by country, sector by sector, generation by generation almost. And so the scaling up is a little bit where I'm looking to you also to say, what have we learned in the youth entrepreneurship world?
Thank you very much, Steiner. And just to say that, Fatu, your story just reminds us of the immense work that we still have ahead of us. So before I start, I want to thank UNDP for putting this together, because this is a critical topic that we have to focus on, not just at the government level, but at the private sector level. And so I want to start with another example, another story, much like Fatu's, and it's an entrepreneur called Zion. Zion was a domestic staff in Nigeria, and unfortunately, domestic staffs in Nigeria are not paid that much. His salary at the time was not up to $30 a month, and then he lost his job. Zion said he was at the verge of suicide, and he actually contemplated suicide, and then he decided to apply for the program when he heard it on radio. But as he was applying, he was extremely skeptical, because he thought, this is Nigeria. You have to know someone who's going to just do anything for you like that, train you, mentor you, and then give you money on top. So he applied and he forgot about it. Much to his shock, a few weeks later, he was called and told that he'd been accepted to the program. And today, Zion has 3 schools in one of the poorest areas of our country, which is the oil-producing Niger Delta, where the everyday job of the people has been decimated by the oil companies. They can't fish because the waters are filled with oil spills. And so they do not have enough money to send their children to school. And so Zion now started 3 schools across different communities, and he's growing. Today he has about 7,000 students across the 3 schools. A bit crowded, but he says it's better than having them roam the streets and stay at home. And he says that what he's doing is to teach the children not a job-seeking mentality, but a job-creating mentality. And that is really the difference. That is what we're trying to promote across Africa. Because we know that the developed economies, Japan for instance, 97% of the job created in Japan is created by the small and medium enterprises, not the big conglomerates, and certainly not government. And that is exactly what is missing in Africa. We are missing that critical small and medium enterprise sector. We're missing that middle class that are not only the consumers, but the job creators. And that is the premise on which the foundation launched a $100 million commitment to identify, train, mentor, and fund 10,000 African entrepreneurs across all 54 African countries over 10 years. This was in 2015. And in fact, when we started the program, most in the development world were, where are you going to find the people? But that first year, we had 20,000 entrepreneurs across Africa applied to the program. And fast forward 5 years later, we're in the 5th year this year. And this year alone, our portal is open just for 8 weeks. We had over 216,000 people apply to the foundation for a foot in the door, for an opportunity to translate their ideas into actual businesses. And so what we do in the foundation is that once we complete the selection, which is done with Accenture, we train them through a proprietary 12-week online training program that has been likened to a mini MBA, because we find that the basic skills, the basic information, the basic analytical skills required to start a business is lacking. They don't teach you that in schools. And so that is why capacity building and training are integral in entrepreneurship development. But then we don't stop there. We know that it doesn't help an entrepreneur to train them and tell them good luck, we wish you well. In fact, a World Bank study, Solutions for Youth Employment, did a study a couple of years ago, and they looked at entrepreneurship programs across 3 emerging markets. And they found that the reason why most do not have the impact that they're looking for is that the focus is always on training. And so you have an oversupply of skill, but then where does the demand come in? And that is why we bring the capital in, because we know that after you've been trained, you need that opportunity to prove your concept, to practicalize your learning, and start your entrepreneurial journey. And that is why each entrepreneur receives $5,000 seed capital, just as Fatu did. And for many African entrepreneurs, that is the difference between being an entrepreneur, starting their journey, creating jobs and generating revenue, or having that idea remain in their head for the rest of their lives. Sadly, there are not that many people in Africa who have friends or families that they can borrow $5,000 from, and we know that the banks will never look at you at that amount. For the VCs, it's way too risky. And so that is the key for us in terms of empowering entrepreneurs and seeing entrepreneurship as the catalyst for economic growth in Africa. Entrepreneurship as what will create sustainable development and make sure that we move from the era of aid to the era of self-empowerment, self-realization. Africans can develop Africa. All of the problems in Africa are business solutions, businesses waiting to be solved. And so that is why the foundation has seen immense success in this model that we have employed. And many partners coming on board, just as the UNDP did this year. Not only did the UNDP support 755 entrepreneurs this year alone on our program, but we have also recently announced a program, a 10-year program to empower 100,000 entrepreneurs across Africa. And that is a classic example of what it means to scale. I think when you find a tried and tested model, a model that works, a model that has, that shows the products, a model that creates entrepreneurs, puts seed capital in their hands, and gives them an opportunity to now go on and pay it forward by starting schools where they're now training and creating future entrepreneurs, by creating jobs in their thousands, by generating additional revenue. That is really the key to ensuring that the burgeoning youth population in Africa is not a catastrophe, but an opportunity. As the UNDP studies show, by 2050, we may be looking at over 800 million young people. And what we are all here today for, and what the foundation works tirelessly for, is to ensure that they are promising and productive citizens of the world. But if we do not act now, and if we do not walk the walk, then they may just be the problematic and perilous threats to the world that illegal migration and extremism creates. So in terms of scaling, I think what we need to see is collaboration and partnership. That is really the key. What we need to see is public sector coming in with policies that will create an enabling environment for entrepreneurs. Most certainly, you shouldn't have to be 40 to own land, so I mean, we will take that up immediately. And recently in West Africa, there have been countries that have also created laws that now allow women to own property. So these are the basic things that we deal with in Africa, but it is what will help catalyze the growth. Apart from policy, we have, just the need for capital. once they're trained, once they have those skills, they need to be able to translate it into practical action, and it takes capital to do that. So I think that, let us begin to see the youth. Let's trust them. Let's put capital in their hands. I think that's one way. If the development world moves in that direction, we will see real sustainable change. Thank you.
Thank you very much for giving us a glimpse of the journey of the foundation. Can I just ask you, have you, since you're in year 5 already, just going back to boys and girls, men and women, of those who apply nowadays, do you see a big difference between in gender terms, and is it different by region? Is it different by rural, urban settings? Just a bit of a, let's say, a sample population of your applicants that you spoke about, these amazing numbers.
Yeah, so it's really interesting that you bring it up, because the first year we had about 23% participation from women, and that was not okay, especially seeing as the foundation itself is almost 90% women. And so we actually went out of our way to target women, especially in North Africa, where we know that there are religious and cultural barriers to women being seen as entrepreneurs. So we're glad to say that today we have 38% applications from women, but we are not resting till we get that to 50%. And in terms of rural participation, that again is where we put in some effort, because we know that for us to really see the growth we need in Africa, we have to be inclusive, and no African must be left behind. And so today we have 47% interest from the rural areas, but then we're finding that we need to adapt our model, because our model leverages technology, which is important for growth, is important for sustainability. But we then need to make sure we are able to reach the rural areas. So if you apply from the rural area and you don't have computers, you don't have internet, you're not literate, you can apply offline. And so we take that offline application and then we now translate it onto our tfconnect.com. But then we're now finding that, okay, even if they apply offline, how do we train them? Because our training is online. So we are now going, especially with our partnership with UNDP, we will be having offline variations of our training to ensure that there is no African left behind. Africans are applying to our program without an email address. But our plan is by the time you're done with the training, you will not only have an email address, but you'll be using it to transact your business.
I just want to validate that by a very personal experience I had just 3 weeks ago when I spent almost a week in Yemen. As you know, Yemen is truly a story of tragedy, of implosion, of collapse, of conflict, destroying everything. We are running small programs there at the moment for entrepreneurship, and I met about 20 of these, not just young people, some of them are actually mid-30s, mid-40s, who have to start again with nothing. And I asked them the question, how did you hear about this program? Because it's basically a program to quickly provide some capital, some training, some business startup capital. And even though, the world is collapsing, I mean, the answer more often was Facebook. And it really intrigued me. How on earth can Facebook be the communication platform in a country where 80% of people are basically not able to earn a living anymore? But this is the world, the contradiction, but also the potential of this digital world. And it is often not my Facebook account, it's the Facebook account of a friend of mine who contacted me and sent me a message and said, you should write here. So I think these are the stories that we also need to learn from on how to, to rely on digital platforms is part of the future, but to overlook those who may not be able to engage with them is also part of our responsibility. Before I come to our two voices on the panel who bring that experience of the external partnership, let me just turn to Regis for another input.